good morning to you, although it's the early afternoon here in Skopje. Mr. Giacomo, I've heard some wonderful things about you as you were a previous NOVA student, so you are a NOVA alum. You went on after NOVA to study in Harvard University with a BA in government. So now that you have received a world-class tertiary education and have commenced a successful career, how do you reflect on your time in NOVA from today's perspective? How did NOVA prepare you for this? How did it build you as a person?
Yeah, so I spent 6 or 7 years in NOVA from 7th grade until 12th grade. And so I was there for middle school and high school as well, and got to study with a lot of teachers and cross paths with a lot of students. And I look back at my time in NOVA very fondly, both because of the academic opportunities that it gave me, as well as for sort of the context of being able to spend my days with both Macedonian students, international students, and having an environment that was fun to be in. And I think when you look back at high school and middle school as well, it's not just about how were my classes, but did I have fun? And I had very good friends. I was able to form relationships with teachers, which was great because the classes were very small. And so I still interact with Bella every now and then, and maybe a few other people, and this sort of human side to the institution is something that I valued at the time and I still value today. In addition, of course, I was able to benefit from having a lot of teachers in different areas, in the sciences and the social sciences as well. And they were all able to nurture my curiosity, nurture my interest for different fields. I got to take a class in psychology, which I had never studied before, but ended up being my minor at Harvard, and it's still something that I'm very interested in. I studied a lot of history with Tihomir Janchovsky, and history remains one of my favorite topics today and intersects with political science a lot. So overall, it was just an environment where I was intellectually stimulated and happy. I was personally happy with all of my friends and teachers and all the activities that there were. And it was an environment where I was able to spend, some formative years of my life and shape my future, but also, be in the moment and enjoy my time there.
Indeed, you reflected on how NOVA build your long-lasting relationships and friendships, inquiry as a way of pursuing knowledge and being curious enough. You also mentioned the social studies, the social sciences, which happen to be my favorite field out of all those scientific fields over there. So I'm going to ask you, how did NOVA prepare you in terms of social sciences? What disciplines did you study? Did you find interesting one separate discipline, or did you establish a connection between them in an interdisciplinary way?
Yeah. So actually, Ivan was my first social science teacher at NOVA in 7th grade. So he and I go way back. But ultimately, I think most of my social studies were through history. I think history 1 and 2, and then AP history, and all of those were with Tiho. And just being able to sort of study the past, understand how the modern world exists because of events and decisions that have happened in the past is something that was very helpful, and being able to understand how these dynamics evolve in different places at different times. Those are all things that I think were sort of foundational to learn, and that I still sort of reflect on every now and then. And then in addition to just that part, I think taking a lot of English literature, English writing classes, and then there my teacher was Bella, usually developing the ability to read critically and to write and to express ideas is something that you can apply to fiction, but you can also apply it to nonfiction and to the study of history and social sciences. And so, I appreciate that you're a writer and that you write for, you've begun to write for news publications, because I enjoy writing a lot as well. And I think reading a lot and critiquing reading and then having somebody critique your writing is a process that is very helpful in making your analysis stronger and your ability to express ideas stronger as well. And bringing those two together, I think, were both great aspects that I gained at Nova.
I must say that I agree, especially when it comes to critiquing writing, because it has happened to me. A teacher or a student or a parent checking an essay and then giving criticism and feedback. I guess you didn't throw the paper in at them, but still,
Yeah,
it happens.
exactly.
That's the part of the personal growth that must occur in a person.
Exactly.
So, since you have a BA in government and psychology from the most elite university in the US and in the world, Harvard, what were your high school achievements in terms of academics, extracurricular activities, community service?
Yeah, so since I was very young, I've mostly been a good student, and so even throughout my time at Nova, I wouldn't say that grades or tests or schoolwork were ever really an issue for me. And in most cases, I was able to pick something up and learn it and run with it pretty effectively. However, I look back and I think one of the most challenging classes I've taken, and I would include college in this as well, was AP Calculus with Venko. And so, I struggled there. I got some pretty poor results, and at one point I feel like I didn't understand anything that was going on in the class. And then by seeking out sort of one-on-one support through him and through some other math teachers at Nova, I was able to learn the concepts. And by the time the end came and I had to take the AP exam, I was ready. I was able to perform well. And so, fortunately, either just because of my nature and how I've always more or less done well in school, and then found the opportunity to improve in other areas where I was struggling more. Ultimately, I had good results at Nova, and also benefited a lot from the school's support for college preparation, because you can do extremely well in high school, but the US application system being as complicated as it is, it's very hard to navigate by yourself. And having, Bella to read my college essays, the school as an SAT testing center, as a TOEFL testing center, with preparatory courses and materials available to a student, I would say that, even beyond my grade, that made a huge difference in allowing me to get to where, I got to college and then continuing from there. So that whole ecosystem, I think, was really essential. In terms of extracurriculars and community service, I remember doing some volunteering with the local Red Cross. I know at the time one of the community service activities, which is sort of funny in retrospect, was going to feed the animals at the zoo, which were malnourished back then, and I hope they're a little bit better off now. But that was nice, and I really like animals, and so any excuse to go to the zoo was always nice. And then in terms of other types of extracurriculars, I was on the soccer team for the high school. I was in the student council. I forget if it was for 1 or 2 years, but I served there for a while. And there was I think at the time, very rudimentary model United Nations, where we didn't travel, we didn't do anything fancy. We just sat in a classroom and pretended to be from a country and debated based on that country's perspective. Now, it sounds like you're on the debate team, that there's more resources, more activities. So that's great to hear, and I'm glad that those programs that were sort of starting when I was at Nova are developing into bigger opportunities.
The part that stuck with me right now is the AP Calculus mentioning, a class you have taken and found most challenging. So indeed, your educational experience confirms the Cambodian idea and theory of education as to receiving a good liberal arts credits and trying to pursue as many disciplines as possible so the knowledge can be broader as well as in-depth. So I agree with that one. Um, in terms of extracurriculars, this can also be connected to sports. Student government and Model United Nations are extracurriculars mostly associated with government majors all over the world. However, sport and soccer is interesting, in my opinion. The next question I have prepared for you is, how did a typical day at Harvard look like?
Mm-hmm.
You obviously work with the most expert professors. How was the learning process structured?
Yeah. So you mentioned, the studying a broad range of subjects, and I think Harvard is also a great place to do that because you have requirements in different disciplines. So before you graduate, every student has to have taken a class in literature, a class in the natural sciences, a class in social sciences, a class in the arts. And so, and there's a lot of choices for each one of those. You could take a class in literature or visual arts or music. And so there's really a lot of opportunities to either focus on something that you already know that you like, or to go in a completely different direction and try something different, which was a wonderful learning environment. In terms of sort of the day-to-day structure, I would say mostly there are lectures in the morning, and that's typically just a professor or a lecturer talking for 1 hour, and that's mostly one directional, so to speak. So they're talking through the lecture plan for whatever subject it might be. And then each class has about 1 to 2 lectures a week, depending on the class. And any student at any one time would have 4 to 5 classes. And in addition to each lecture, there is something called section, which is where the class as a whole is broken down into smaller groups of students. So you might be 100, 200, 300 people in a class, and you're broken down in sections of maybe 15 people. And there, the sections are led by a graduate student, so somebody who's studying for their PhD, and give room for students to ask more questions, to discuss with each other the week's readings. And so it's more interactive. It's more about students speaking up and engaging and bringing their own views to the class. And so that's sort of the in-classroom aspect of the curriculum. But then there's also very important sort of not self-taught is not the right word, but self-driven aspect, which is, especially for the social sciences, and those were most of the classes that I took, reading materials in preparation of each class basically every day. And so, when you're taking 3 or 4 classes in social sciences, that might mean reading between maybe 150 to 200 pages a day. And it's unlikely that you'll get to all of those pages for all of your classes. And so it's about, prioritizing and identifying which are the most important readings. But so the typical day would be classes or sections in the morning and early afternoon, and then the later afternoon and evening spent reading in preparation or writing essays or papers if there were any. And then, because extracurriculars were a big part of my time at Harvard as well, meeting with other students who are on the board of an organization or managing an event or planning for a future event. And there were times where I definitely spent more time on extracurriculars than I did on classes. And so balancing all of those could be a little bit tricky at times, but provided lots of diversity, and then of course social aspects as well, and going out and spending time with friends and all of that.
It really sounds as an interesting and exciting experience. Moving on to the master's degree, you hold a dual degree, namely Master of Public Policy and Public Administration from the London School of Economics, LSE, and the National University of Singapore, NUS. What does it entail? What is the curriculum for a degree in public policy and public administration? As dual degrees are getting more and more popular by the years, what is the difference between those two? What's the difference between public policy and public administration? To an outsider, it sounds the same.
Yeah, to be honest, to an insider, sometimes I fail to distinguish the difference as well. And I think because public policy and public administration are relatively newer degrees, I think different places in the world define them differently. And so there isn't really a standard of what one of them means exactly. I will just say, at least here in the US, usually a Master of Public Policy is a degree that you would start, between 2 and 5 years after you graduate from college. So you would have a little bit of work experience, and this degree would position you to be in a sort of middle level management, potentially with a goal of advancing within your organization. And Master of Public Administration is something you would study maybe 7 to 10 years after you graduate. So it's something more advanced, and this is for more people who are more interested in being more senior managers. So at least here, that's what the difference is. But it's in the UK, it was a slightly different approach. In Singapore, it was a slightly different approach as well. So, you need to look at that in the context. In terms of the degree as a whole, and I think here, Master of Public Policy and Public Administration are fairly similar to each other. It's really a combination of economics, statistics, political science, international affairs as the foundational disciplines. And so you're required to be able to do some economic analysis, do some quantitative analysis as well, and then be able to know, what are a country's laws, what are a country's institutions, why does its political system work in its particular way, why does the bureaucracy work in the particular way, and use all of that information to help make decisions for public policy. And then on top of that, I think when done really well, the degree is about hands-on learning. So it's about learning through case studies of public policies that were applied in a particular place in a particular time, and seeing what went well, what didn't go well, why did the president or prime minister or minister make a particular decision, how did the public respond, how did the media respond, and putting all of those together to sort of see what the ingredients are of effective and less effective policies. And another area of hands-on learning that I think is very important and that I enjoyed in my programs were client-facing projects. So as a student, you would be assigned to a client, which is a real organization. It could be a ministry, it could be a non-governmental organization, it could be sometimes even a private corporation, and you would have a task to research a certain issue or write a report to inform this organization's decision on a particular topic. And for example, my final master's thesis in Singapore, which is sometimes called the capstone, in this case it was called the policy analysis exercise. I worked with another student on behalf of the Singapore Ministry of National Development, which does urban planning and urban development. And we analyzed how to improve the way that the government gets feedback from the public about its development plans, and thinking about how that is applied to specific region in Singapore that the government was looking at to implement some new initiatives. And so it was really meant to be hands-on and get you, even when you're still a student, to sort of deal with some of the challenges and issues that you would when you graduate and you become a professional. professional.
We might need you here when building public policy or doing
I
that.
think we're needed everywhere at this point.
Yeah, especially in this point. Um, Before moving on to the career aspect, because the Nova community is centered around education, let's get back to the education department.
Mhm.
So you've studied in Harvard, London, Singapore. They all are metropolitan areas. However, the sheer distance between them and all those oceans probably makes them very different. How would you comment on that? Which university experience did you enjoy the most?
That's a great question. I think, Harvard is sort of your typical American university that, it's in a city, but it has a campus environment. And so you can sort of tell the boundary of where the city begins and the campus ends. And although, you can cross streets and shops in the city to go from one part of the campus to another, there is a very strong campus feel, and there's a clear distinction of when you're in the university and when you're in the city. Whereas LSE was very different in that it had, it was much more urban. Its buildings are in the middle of London. And so even if there's a cluster of them, if you leave your building, you're in the city, you're on the street, and you could be by students, or you could be just by regular people walking by and going to their jobs or whatever. And so, it's a different environment. And, I really liked living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I really liked living in London. Both of them are, places where there's great quality of life, lots of social and cultural activities, and both provided a place to be a student and to be, immersed in an academic environment, but also be able to, if I wanted to go to the theater or to the cinema or to, bars or to travel, I could do all of those things. Singapore was also interesting because it's another, large global city. Obviously, even though it's used to be part of the British Empire, so one of the national languages is English. Culturally, there's the largest population is ethnic Chinese. There's a large ethnic Indian population as well, and a large ethnic Malaysian population. So it's really multicultural in a way that's different from London or the US. And that was really exciting. And being in, one of the reasons why I chose to go to Singapore was because, you hear a lot about the rise of Asia, of China, of India, and how, Asia is the continent of the future. And I thought, it's one thing to read about it in Europe or in the US, but it's another thing to be there on the ground. And, I have to say, I really, really enjoyed going there and making that decision, because being able to both see Singapore and then travel to some other countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia and see, how they're evolving and how people here think about the future is really eye-opening in thinking, about public policy, about history, about politics. And, that provided another really great environment in which to be in university. So, if I have any advice to give, it would be to, find places that have this combination of being able to learn in the university, but also being able to learn in the culture at large and in the city at large, and to be able to go to, cultural events, to go to political events, and to gain a broader exposure through those as well.
All right, thank you for the answer. Now, all right, thank you for the answer. Yeah. So now going on to your career, you're now working in HR&A Advisors, a renowned consulting firm. As someone interested in pursuing a government political science degree myself, how does a career in consulting look like?
Yeah, so this is my first time working in consulting. My previous work experience has always been in either local government or state government in the US primarily. And when you're working in government, ultimately, you're supposed to, if you're doing it well at least, you're supposed to be advancing things for the good of the public. So your ultimate question when you choose whether to do something is this making the public or the community better off? And that's sort of what grounds all of your decision and all of your thinking. And the public includes everybody. So it includes people of different ethnicities, people with disabilities, people who live in cities, people who live in rural areas. And you're not really, or you shouldn't discriminate between them, even though, of course, you can have different policies for different areas. Being in the private sector is a little bit different because, especially in consulting, you're working for a company that has to make money in order to continue existing and pay its staff. But you're working for a client that has their own interests as well. And so the client might be interested in, for example, I'll talk about HR&A Advisor specifically, which does consulting for urban development. Our clients are universities, city governments, foundations, and they might be interested in, I want to build a new campus somewhere, where should I build it? Or I have this land in the city, should I build housing? Should I build a shopping center? Should I build a factory? What's the best use of this land? And so you're dealing with the interest of your client, maybe the interest of the community that lives where the project would be, and then your own interest as a consultant, and you have to think about your organizational revenue and whatnot. And so it's a little bit more complex. The incentives are a little bit different. I think, at least in HR&A, we're very mission driven, and we're still concerned about how do we advance the good of the community and of society through the projects that our clients have. And fortunately, most of our clients are also thinking about their initiatives in these terms. But there are these different incentives. Having said that, I think working in consulting gives you the opportunity to work with a lot of different clients in a lot of different geographies. So right now I'm working on a project in California. I'm working on a project in Rhode Island, which is a small state north of New York. I'm working on a project near Washington, D.C. I'm working on a project in Arizona. And my firm also does some international projects as well for the World Bank or for other institutions. And so you get a much broader exposure in terms of what places you're working in. You get broader exposure in terms of the types of projects. And that's something that you get less of in government, where you might be working on one or two projects at the same time, and they're more focused. So, there's different trade-offs. I would say that in the long term, I'm still interested in having a career in government, because that's where I think I can do the most good and have the most influence. But, there are environments in the private sector and the nonprofit sector as well that are very interesting, that give you the opportunity to learn, and where you can work with other colleagues who are like-minded and share similar interests. And I would, encourage you and other students to look for those opportunities and, think through about what they can give you, and then take them when they present themselves.
Thank you for the concluding sentence of the answer, because it leads me to the final point of the interview. And to end the interview on an anecdotal but also futuristic note, however paradoxically they sound. So 2 questions coming up. What's an interesting experience, anecdote you would like to share with us? And where do you see yourself in 10 years?
All right, an interesting anecdote. That's so broad. I think I'll maybe start with where I see myself in 10 years, which that's also a different question, and I, not one that I can necessarily answer easily, but I think that my wife is American, and we're both working here in New York. And once you start to have a family, you have to make decisions together. So, we've talked a lot about where we want to be in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, and I think the great thing about our situation is that we're open to maybe moving to a different city in the US, to a different country in the world. We've talked about maybe either going to Italy or moving to the UK or moving to Asia. And so in a way, I cannot tell you I will be here in New York with my job in having gotten 3 promotions in 10 years. But at the same time, I can tell you that I'm very excited that I will continue to have opportunities to travel, to live in different cities, and to experience different cultures and organizations. And I think that's what I'm most passionate about. In the long term, I think I'll be either in the US or in maybe Italy or somewhere else in Europe, and ideally working in some government role. But we'll see where that is, and maybe in 10 years we can reconnect and see what the actual answer to that question was. In terms of anecdote, are you looking for something from Nova or from college or from other points in my life specifically?
Well, you can mention a Nova experience. I was also thinking had a famous person gave a guest lecture at Harvard. So
yeah. Let me see. I think I would point out, and this ties into what I talked about, history and political science and public policy. While I was studying in Singapore, I took a trip to Myanmar just by myself for tourism. And as you might know, Myanmar was under military rule for many decades, and then in the last 5 to 10 years, it started to transition to more democratic rules of elections. But it's still, they've had issues with genocide and ethnic cleansing in the last few years, but that was after I traveled there. And I wanted to visit because I had heard a lot of things from friends who went there and said it was a beautiful country, and it was, but it's also a country that is still quite poor. And just driving there one day, you can see people building. I could see people building roads basically without any machinery, with carrying dirt or gravel or cement by hand, mixing it with a shovel instead of with the truck that mixes cement. And that really made me think about the fact that where Myanmar is today, maybe Italy was 50 years ago, the UK was 100 years ago. And so being able to see this phase of development in the country, and thinking about what public policy would mean that it can become wealthier, but also that its wealth can be distributed equitably among rural and urban communities, among all ethnic groups, about how you can achieve human rights for all of the population. I think that really highlighted to me the importance of public policy decisions, and the importance of knowing that all countries were at that stage at some point, and then some countries have been able, fortunately, to develop from that. And as somebody who is in public policy, I think I see it as my responsibility to help whatever community I'm working for to be on that path and to continue improving, and to always look to the future and look to deliver benefits to the community.
In terms of in the future prediction, the style of making decisions you explained, we have a special name for that here in Macedonia. It's called democratic family. That every participant takes part in a decision, and I think it's unique to this place. I did not, I haven't heard it used anywhere else.
Mhm.
And in terms of the anecdote and history, as you mentioned it in your first answer, uh, I would like to say that we see history as a thing of the past or as a fixed thing that never changes. However, most people, or we as humankind, fail to understand this, that history is being written at the moment, and all those decisions that were taken some years ago may be the result of one or two people working together. So instead of seeing it as a fixed, we should see it as a living, changing thing that impacts everyone. And that's why everyone should study it.
Exactly. Yeah, and you can see it, very well either now in Macedonia or in the U.S. with the use of history for current political needs. So in Macedonia, with the question of the name, with the legacy of which country gets to claim Alexander the Great. In the U.S., with the question of Confederate flags and the legacy of racism. And you're absolutely right, and that's a great point that history is being made right now, but history is not of the past. We use history today for political reasons, either on the left or on the right or whoever. And knowing more about it, I think, helps us be more realistic and informed, and hopefully better citizens and decision makers as well.
Yeah, as all three of us here are real political buffs, thank you for ending the interview on such a note. Thank you, Mr. Giacomo.
Yeah, no problem. I was very happy to do this.